About a month ago, I was pretty vocal about how the UFC was telling fighters not to wrestle. Most notably, Muhammad Mokaev. He came out before he was cut and said the UFC has come to me and they told me not to wrestle, they might not re-sign me. Then we had Carl Williams, a notable heavyweight wrestler who went out there, fought a striker, and didn't shoot a takedown until he was almost unconscious in the third round. Chelsea Chandler fell into that same category when she stomped forward like Swamp Thing instead of shooting takedowns. Both of their camps came out after the fact and said the UFC specifically told them not to wrestle. If they are telling fighters not to use their best skill set, they are affecting the outcomes of the fights, and that is only a bad thing. But here we are, coming off the heels of UFC 306 with a very unsatisfying co-main event and a less than stellar main event, and anything anybody can talk about is the wrestling. My name is Angelo, this is We Want Picks, and I'm gonna tell you why I think the UFC should tell fighters not to wrestle. Before I tell you why I think the non-stop wrestling is harming UFC's product, let me remind you that I'm a lifelong wrestler. I have wrestled the majority of my life as a competitor. Once I was done with my competing days and packed on a few pounds, I said, let me go ahead and coach. I have coached youth wrestling, I have coached high school wrestling, and I have traveled this country as a wrestler and as a coach. I absolutely love wrestling. With that being said, I absolutely love fights. I'm a diehard UFC fan, and I have seen every single UFC when it aired. Being of the old school generation of UFC fans, I tend to agree with Joe Rogan when he talks about it's a fist fight. There should almost be no rules whatsoever, and whoever wins, wins. I don't disagree with that sentiment, and that is a very strong Joe Rogan position. He doesn't even think there should be stand-ups. He thinks you should be able to take somebody down, hold them there for as long as you want, and the referee will do nothing about it. And while that point makes sense to me, and this is a sport to determine who is the best fighter on the planet, and if you can't stand up, that's your problem. I agree with all of that. With that being said, non-stop wrestlers that are looking only for control time are a problem for the UFC. And you know what I'm talking about. You see those names on a fight night and say, well, that fight's gonna suck. There needs to be a balance. You can't be losing fights because you're not doing your most important thing. But you also can't be out there taking a paycheck and not living up to the expectations. At the end of the day, the UFC is entertainment. This is a sport built off of pay-per-view buys, merch, and advertisements. Without those three things, the UFC does not exist. They are a company. They have shareholders, they have a board, they have earnings projections that if they don't meet, there are real life penalties and issues for that. So if we have a whole bunch of boring control time wrestlers that suck the life out of an event, well, we're gonna get fewer viewers the next week, and then fewer viewers the week after that. This year has been especially negative, from the internet comments, to the tweets, to the articles about how the UFC is too watered down, too boring, we're not getting the big matchups anymore. A lot of that has to do with the fact that they're doing fights every week. Another chunk of that has to do with the fact that the UFC pays you half your money just to show up, and the other half of your money to win. And what that does is it builds a mindset of, I need to win. It doesn't build the mindset of, let me go out there, be as entertaining as possible, and I will always have a job here. It is, let me go out there, get this takedown, be heavy on top, and I'll get the second half of my paycheck. Ultimately, I love this sport. I'm gonna watch it literally no matter what. But I am not the normal everyday fan. If you watch the Fight Foods vlog from UFC 306, you watch my buddy Bryce come over. He came over a little late. He's got kids, he's got a family, he lives around the corner. He wasn't able to show up until the featured fight of the evening, the Diego Lopez-Brian Ortega fight. He walked in, he sat down, thoroughly entertained. And then we rolled right into the co-main event. One of the most boring 25-minute fights we have ever seen. I fully understand it was a title fight, and I fully understand both of those women have been entertaining in the past, and I fully understand that that fight meant everything for the division. So I'm not panning the matchup, and I'm not even panning the fact that Valentina Shevchenko went out there and was boring because she did what she had to do to win the belt. But my buddy Bryce, who doesn't watch all the fights, he comes over for the big ones when he can, walked into this house, was here for about an hour and a half, and more than 2/3 of that was not entertaining. The main event had a few flashes, but for the most part was a letdown. The co-main event was an absolute snooze fest, and there was nothing to talk about while watching that fight. Those are the fans that you're going to lose if we don't get a hold of the wrestling situation. And I don't think we're in dire straits just yet. And I love seeing the entertaining wrestlers. Isaac Dogarian is a perfect example. He will shoot a double, pick you up, and slam you down. Merab isn't even in the boring wrestling category. He doesn't finish anybody, so you can expect his fights to go long, but he's constantly doing something. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm gonna continue watching this sport regardless of what they put out there, but I do think the UFC needs to focus on the entertainment, encouraging fighters to stay busier, encouraging fighters to do more, and I think they can get there by revamping the pay structure. Pay them for the fight. Pay them when they're entertaining, not just to win, because that's when you're gonna have people gaming the system, laying on top, being heavy, and winning at all costs, and the costs are the fans.